to spend some time with you all tonight and give you an update on those things that we've done since the last time we got together. And I think I made a commitment to you that I would try to do these about once every month. I think we're about 5 weeks since the last one. We'll try to do another one in early March. We don't have a whole lot to talk about tonight, but there are some interesting observations that we made, some things that happened that have kind of surprised us. And we've been able to install some additional assets for producing gas from the aquifer and testing our ability to produce gas from the shallow zone above the aquifer. So what I'd like to do is just kind of run through a quick list and talk about new assets. We put in actually 5 new pressure or passive vent wells. These are the shallow wells that go down to maybe 80 feet or so approximately, expecting to encounter gas that's above the aquifer that we can relieve passively, which means you basically put a hole in the ground, you open the valve up, and you let the gas relieve naturally as best it can. Now, of those 5 that we installed, and the 6th, which was the very first one, is the one we put up over here by bubble site 56, only 2 have produced results, favorable results, I should say. I mean, it's, on one hand, it's a good thing that we put in a well we didn't get any gas, but on the other hand, we'd like to produce gas if there's gas there. But I think for the 4 that were non-productive, it can be said that there's not gas there. So that's a good thing. Okay? It's a good thing, but not a good thing. It's a good thing. But in any event, we're still thinking about what we're going to do with those wells. We'll most likely come back in the near future and plug them and get them off the landscape, get them out of your yards and out of the neighborhoods if they're not going to provide any utility. Those that continue to produce something will obviously produce them as long as we can. And that's really our objective with the ORW wells too. We want to produce all the gas we can for as long as we can, get as much gas out of the ground as possible. That's our primary objective. Okay? Now, speaking of the ORWs, since the last time we got together, we installed 2 new ones, which puts our total up over 50 now. What are we at? 51. Okay, and of those 51, 16 currently produce. We're making about 25,000 cubic feet a day.
Yeah, 400 some odd cubic, 4,900. 49. Yeah, 49,000 cubic feet.
I'm sorry, 49. I'm confusing the cumulative.
Million cumulative.
Right, the cumulative is about 25 million, and we're producing about 45 to 46,000 cubic feet a day. And what's interesting is that if you look at this data and look at these graphs, you can see a couple of things that stand out. One, there is a declining production curve, and that's what one would hope to find. One would expect to find where you're producing gas that's, 1, either finite volume, or 2, it's not getting recharged at a significant rate. Could be a little both, we don't know. I've said before, there's no way to really know for sure that there's not recharge taking place, but I can say definitively that we are producing and the trends are downward, which is another good thing. Okay? And what's also interesting to note here is that each of these colors is a well, and we're getting about 75 to 80% of all of our gas from just a handful of wells. One of them is right over here at 36, and the other one is over by Brine production well number 2. OGR well number 1. Those 2 wells together make about 30–40% of our total daily production. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a large number of them that are non-productive. We've plugged a few of them. These 3 have been plugged. They were in close proximity to the sinkhole. We had a sloughing event that occurred back here a few months ago. We decided that it would be wise to go ahead and get these plugged and out of the way. They were not producing at the time. And we may do that on some of these other wells as time passes. There is one other drawing that we put up, Mike. Does it sit right here? This one is interesting because it demonstrates the distribution of the producing wells. These with green circles around them are those that are currently producing. And these right here are non-productive. These 3 are the 3 that I just mentioned that have been plugged. And what you can see from this is that we've pretty well dotted the landscape with ORW wells. We put them in basically everywhere that we can in a density pattern that is consistent with what the radius of influence testing told us, about 500 feet from wellhead to wellhead. That's the first observation. The second observation is we knew we had an area over here, and an area here, and an area over here that appeared to have a higher percentage of subsurface gas in the aquifer. And that was from all the CPT probing that we did. If you remember, months ago we talked about the need to put production wells, ORW wells, right here in Sportsman's Landing. So there you have it. I mean, it's showing where the gas is produced. Down here, up here, and up here. And everything in between has gone relatively dormant. I don't know that there are any ORW wells that have not produced anything. We've got some volume of gas out of virtually all of them. But most of them today have gone dormant. Our interpretation of that is that we have succeeded in depleting the gas from the aquifer in those locations. Okay? The wells are still there. We can always go back in and do some things with them and find out if there's any way we can enhance them and make them flow a little bit more, or if they pressure up naturally, we'll be able to tell from the pressure monitoring equipment on the well. So that's the point to be made on ORW wells. We talked at the last meeting about the need for a new south berm. Construction began, what, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, approximately? And as of this week, we're complete with...
Last
Friday, we are complete with the initial containment, which is the sand that comes in first, and then basically forms a roadway upon which we will put other materials in a impermeable liner, and then surface it with limestone to make it consistent with the other. We're on target to have all of that completed by the end of the month. Is that correct?
No. No.
I didn't say which month.
Yeah, first to middle of April for the final grade to be there.
Yeah.
So that includes 3 weeks of allowing it to settle and the geotechnical and things like that. So we're ahead of schedule right now.
But the good news is the old south berm, what we call the original south berm, remains above water, so we're still getting benefit from it. It's not allowing any fluids to mix from the sinkhole to the area south of that original berm. We haven't seen any dramatic changes in subsidence in that area. Remember, that's what spurred the need to go in and put in the new south berm. We were concerned about losing the old south berm. Well, we haven't experienced that. That's been a good thing. And we haven't seen any dramatic changes in seismicity since the last time we got together. In fact, the last, what we call a swarm, occurred in early January. So we're about 6, maybe 7 weeks now since we've had any elevated activity in terms of MEQs, micro-earthquakes. That's a good thing. There's a lot of good things here. I mean, there's a lot of good things to be optimistic about. The logging of the cavern has shown that we're about 99% full. The last time we went in was last Friday, and we tagged the fill about, I think it was less than 10 feet from the cavern roof. So when you consider that the cavern at one time was almost 2,000 feet from top to bottom, that final 10 feet or so is less than 1% of its total capacity. So that's been encouraging. Let's see, what other things did we do? Last time we met, we talked about ORW 38, which is up here to the north, where we plan to do some testing to see if we could enhance gas flow by pulling small amounts of water out of a ORW well. We put in a subsidence monitoring grid around the well, and we began a process of pumping water out. We ran that for about 4 or 5 days, pulled about 60,000 gallons of water out. Found that we had to pull water out at a much higher rate than we originally planned just to get the water level to drop. We never really got it to drop as far as we wanted to. And I think that is because of the characteristics of the reservoir. The formation where the well is completed, it probably has very high permeability. It's very porous, and water was just able to come in as fast as we could pump it out. So that's why we had to go up to that 12 gallons per minute. But it became pretty clear after we started that it wasn't going to work. We didn't make any gas. So that's a good thing, right? No gas. So we shut that down. We're continuing to monitor the subsidence. We're going in daily, and we will do that until we meet our 2-week obligation. We've seen no indication of any compaction, any subsidence around that well. We're going through the same process with ORW 21, and this is just a little bit off to the east of 38.
This is 38, and this is where we're moving it to. So.
Oh, I'm sorry, over here. Okay, west, the other east. And we'll go through the same process there. We did a preliminary test last week to confirm that we still had connectivity to the aquifer. And we pulled at about 1.5 gallons per minute. And we were able to drop the water level down
20 feet.
20 feet, which is encouraging, which means we won't have to pump that well as hard as we did the other one. So we'll go through the same process with that well. We'll start to pull small amounts of water out. And if we start to make gas, then maybe we'll see something there that will encourage us, at least to the extent that we can take that process out and use it on other ORW wells. If it doesn't produce any gas, we'll shut it down, just like we did with number 38. And I'll repeat this, we don't have any desire to do anything over here that would induce subsidence around homes. Okay? 38 and 21 were for testing purposes. And that commitment remains. You're not going to come in here and pull water out from under the ground around your homes. Okay? So, that completes that. We can look for 21 to start, I guess, next week.
The 24th.
24th.
Okay. Okay. Second little bit of activity that you'll see, you'll notice, and this will be kind of phased in over the next couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks. We're going to bring back one of the CPT rigs. And we're going to go in and strategically pick locations where we think we've been effective at pulling gas out of the ground. And we're going to run subsequent CPT logs, or probes, and see if we can see any noticeable change in the gas interval, the gas-water interface, if you will. We've had some history, some success with that out here, where we've been able to come in and sink a CPT where we had gas before, and the subsequent CPT found no gas, and that tells us that the venting has had some good effect, and it's been successful. So we'll come back in, and we'll use that as a way to monitor how successful we've been, and so that'll be taking place. We also have in the works a plan to go to up to 10 ORW wells, just a handful of them that remain productive, some of them that are not productive, most of them over south of Highway 70 near the sinkhole, and start a process of pulling water out of them. Again, very low volumes to try to replicate what we did with OGR number 1, which has been one of our best producers. In fact, it is the best. It has made 5 million. Approximately 5 million of the 25 million. So about 20% of all the gas we produce has come out of this one ORW well right here. And when we started the process on this well of pulling just a small amount of water out of it, the production rate more than doubled. It went up significantly. And that's the whole reason we want to come in and try this on some of these other wells. And we'll start in this region over here. And these wells that have black squares around them will be the first ones that we'll start with. We'll do them in a series. We'll start with a group of 3, and then we'll move to another group. And again, the whole objective is to try to induce flow, try to get more gas to come to the ground.
Basically, the water's holding that gas down, not coming through the wall.
Right, right. It's such a low pressure that it can't overcome that water column. And that's really been our dilemma. We know we've got gas down there, but it doesn't want to come to the surface because it's just right at that break.
Well, it doesn't want to go to the well. I mean, if you
You've
have,
got-
well, it doesn't matter how much.
You've got water
you
pushing
have.
the gas up
If
above the
If
screen.
you had a bubble on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to come
Yeah,
to the surface. It's a question of flowing
but you have,
horizontally to the well.
you're exactly right, Bob. You've got gas that's trapped above the water, so if we can bring the water down, the gas will follow it into the screens.
You don't try leaving them shut in long enough and see if the pocket fills up again?
All the
We have tried that. Some of these wells have been shut in, and we periodically go back and monitor pressure. And when we do the CPTs, that CPT will indicate whether that gas column is decreasing or increasing.
And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but the process we have of going around and just systematically pulling water out of the wells, we don't discriminate between those that are producing and those that aren't, right?
Well, in the past, we have done that regardless of the well was a producer or not. Right now, we're concentrating that effort around the producing wells.
Right. Okay. And that's, that can happen maybe once every week, 10 days?
Yeah, it's a milk run. They just do a schedule of one well to the next until we get them all done and start the process over.
Right. Okay. Told you it was going to be a short meeting. I don't have much more to say except that the other thing we find encouraging is we haven't had any major growth. There hasn't been any giant fallen industries disappearing to speak of for quite some time. I believe that is attributable to the fact that the cavern is practically full. You know, we've kind of suspected all along that we'd go through a period, an extended period, where this thing would remain pretty active, while the earth was going down in the sinkhole and coming into the cavern, and the two were connected. But ultimately, they would find a balance point. And I think that we're probably very close to that right now, and that's why the thing has been relatively calm. The seismicity has been relatively calm. I mean, compared
We had,
to
since
months ago.
midnight last night, we had, around 9 o'clock this morning, we had 3 MEQs, which is, you know, very minimal activity.
And there were periods where a day we would see maybe 100 or 200. In the cases of the two swarms, they were peaking at almost 1,000 in a day. So it's been a dramatic change. And again, I think it has to do with the system getting to some point of equilibrium. So it will not support a hole that's deep for very long. So there should be some subtle sloping off or movement, but I don't really think it's going to be related to the cavern filling. I think it's just going to be related to the fact that you've got these steep edges, and they want to get back to level. Okay? There's two pretty good examples that we can go to in situations that are not entirely, but kind of similar to this, and look at the dimensions of the lake that remain. One of them is at Cavern Lake at Bayou Choctaw, and the other is at Lake Penior, Jefferson Island. In the latter one, that was where Texaco drilled into the salt mine, Morton salt mine, and it drained the lake, created a sinkhole, created a hell of a mess. And today that water depth is about 200 feet, where that lake is. Originally it was 10 feet. Okay?
How deep is our sinkhole now?
It went back down a little bit from the surveying that we did last week. We were at about 180 last time we met, and we found it at about 200 in the last, plus or minus. Okay? The other example, the one I mentioned, is that Bayou Choctaw was where a cavern, a brine production cavern that was mined way back in the day, before we had the expertise that we have today. And it was mined too high. It mined all the way up to the cat rock, and then it collapsed. And this thing created what's called Cavern Lake. That cavern filled in the sediment, and there's a nice 800-foot diameter lake over there on the, I think it's on the north side of the dome. I'm not real sure, but it's at about 100 feet, 120 feet deep. So I think what we'll end up with is somewhere between there, 200 to 120 foot lake, if you will. And it'll be about this size, probably a little bit larger, but I think it's going to take a pretty good amount of time before that gentle sloughing off of the edges occurs. That's a process that might take years. This happened fast because you had such a rapid displacement of all the material filling the cavern. Now that that process is relatively done, the rest is just going to be gravity and trying to get to some level of stability.
What needs Lake Corn?
There's been a lot of names suggested.
Okay, we could call it something else.
Lake Football.
Lake Cartwright, Lake Boudreaux, Lake Jimitev, you name it. Which one you want?
We have a lottery here.
John's got it up top.
You don't want a monument?
No, yeah.
That's how I feel like.
Well, Cartwright doesn't sound French enough. So I don't think.
Mark,
Yes, sir.
okay, I wanna talk about the gas a little bit. Well 36, right here in the boat ramp parking lot. I don't know if you misspoke a while ago, or y'all thinking has changed, that's what I wanna know. When I agreed to let y'all put that well in right there, I was told the radius of influence of that well was approximately, if I remember right, 150 feet. A while ago you mentioned radius of influence of 500 feet. Has y'all thinking on that changed? Because I have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
I can answer that, Dennis. Our original spacing was based on an estimated zone of influence of 500 feet. Now, after we put this in and it started producing, Dr. Charlie Faust did some calculations, and I don't remember exactly what his zone of influence is, but it was close to 150 feet.
Right.
Yeah. But the spacing was, what we had planned was a 500-foot space.
Because, you know, that well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did a little research on this. That well has produced over 2 million cubic feet of gas.
It has been one of the better producers.
Okay, but what I don't understand here that I'm trying to comprehend if the circle of influence wasn't greater than what we just talked about, I remember the depth of the gas was supposed to be about 10 feet. I'm no mathematician, but those numbers don't compute. That well should have been out of gas.
Yeah.
Anybody care to speculate on that?
Well, there's two things that have likely occurred, either one or both. That the thickness of the gas was greater than was estimated, or the zone of influence is actually larger than was calculated.
And I think there could be also a third possibility. Maybe it's being replenished.
It could be flowing from lower elevations to higher elevations.
I'll offer my opinion. It's speculation, but I think one thing you have to consider down here is that the deposition of a sand, let's call the MRAA a sand deposit, is not real even because it's in a fluvial environment. It was laid down in a river setting. And if you go to a delta, in fact, you go to the base of the Atchafalaya or this whole area, over time there have been streams that have just done this all over. They're still doing it over time, given enough time. Everywhere you have a channel, you get a certain kind of deposit, and on the banks, you get a certain kind of deposit. You might have nice, clean sand in the channel, and up on the banks, you get the real fine, silty stuff that only deposits whenever flood stage occurs. Fluid level gets over the bank and it lays down sediment. The point I'm making is that the modeling that's done to calculate and make determinations of radius of influence discounts the geology or the stratigraphy or the difference in the sediment. It pretty much assumes that everything within that circle is the same stuff, but the fact of the matter is that well may just be perfectly placed in one of these channels where the sand content is much greater and it has a longer reach, and so it's reaching out, getting gas from a greater area. That's one possibility.
Okay. Yes, it is, and again, I can't even pretend to make the suggestions as how to operate this thing and how to solve the problem, but this well is producing a lot of gas. Number 50 down the street's producing a lot of gas. How far are they apart? 700 feet? 600 something feet. I mean, I wonder, should we do a little experiment one day and say, okay, let's shut in one of those wells and let's see if production increases at the other well. If that would happen, I mean, this is just Kunash reckoning now, but wouldn't that mean the radius of influence is greater than what we thought?
It could, or it could suggest that there's some kind of connection, stratigraphy, or stratigraphic connection. But I would argue that you may not have to do that. Number one, we don't want to shut anything in. We want to keep the gas flowing. But we could go back and look at the trend, the production trend from 36, and see if there were any shifts whenever we put the number 50 online. If they were connected, we probably should have seen something change in 36. And I don't know.
36 went up.
Actually went up.
It's actually
Yeah, I've already checked it.
It's actually going
Yeah,
up.
it should have went down.
But that's a good thing.
So much for that theory.
You know, well, I mean,
Scratch that one.
it's just it's perplexing. It's hard.
It is.
We dotted the country with CPTs. Where's the CPT map? Look at all these right here. And Dr. Hecox and others built models from the data, and it's hard to make sense out of the geology out here. It's just a jumbled up, mixed up layer of, the most distinct feature you have is the MRAA, but even it's not pure sand. You've got intervals in there where it goes back into impermeable shale, and they're little lenses, they're not continuous. So, it's hard to say.
Well, again, my question is not designed to embarrass anybody or make anybody look like they don't know anything. I think there's a lot that's still unknown here, so there's nothing wrong with you or anybody else saying we really don't know,
No,
but it's something to look at, it's something maybe to study.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit that. I mean, and I think everybody involved in this response has been pretty consistent in saying that. If you remember, months ago, we were down at the Napoleon Community Center, we were all saying, we don't have a book that we can pick up to understand this. We've got to learn as we go. And it truly is an unprecedented event. We're dealing with things that have never really happened and have not had to, people have had to deal with. So we're writing the rules as we go, but absolutely open to any suggestions. I mean, it'd be an interesting exercise to go back and look at the pressure trends and data and see if there was any shift at all. not only with 50, but with any of the others that are, you know, around 36, right?
Right.
37 didn't do much, but
37 shut in.
Yeah, 37 is shut in.
these guys over here are still producing.
Yeah.
How about the two new ones south of us?
56, 55 and 56, they're still producing.
Pretty good.
And yeah, they're
Pretty good.
above 0.5 MCF per day. And 57 and 58, which we just put in, are both flowing pretty well.
What I'm gonna do for the next time we get together, I'll get a couple of drawings like this that have each of the wells, and we'll have their current flow rate. So you can get a picture of the disproportionate volume of gas that's coming from just a handful of wells. And I think those are locations where we just happen to tap into the right spot. Again, I refer back to this. This is good stuff right here. I mean, this tells me that we're gaining on it, we're making progress. Give it enough time, this is gonna get down to that 0 point. And you can pretty much draw a line and get there. Will we ever get all of the gas out? I doubt it. I really doubt it. There's gonna be a certain percentage that's gonna stay there. I think the bigger question you have to ask yourself is it a hazard to me? You know, is it something like a little?
Right.
And I think most of us would agree that it's been manageable. I mean, we've been able to live with it. It's not the best of circumstances, but nor has it been, you know, a situation where anybody's been hurt, thank God.
I have another question, and I guess I'm full of questions tonight that I don't have answers, so y'all help me out. You mentioned we're gonna see another round of CPT.
Yes, sir.
Okay, in my mindset, I learned a little bit about CPT and MIHPT. CPT, I thought just basically checked the soil conditions below the surface of the earth, but MIHPT had something on that probe to actually detect gas. So again, it's Kunas logic thinking here. Should we be using more MIHPT or CPT is the tool that's appropriate at this point?
We settled on CPT because we found that it was better suited for what our objectives were. And the concern we had with the MIHPT is that it's a flame ionization detector. That's the I in it.
Right.
And what it does is it actually picks up hydrocarbons.
Right.
And the concern we had was that the MIHPT would give us false positives and would take into account gas that's there naturally, the biogenic, the swamp gas. A lot of the gas that we pull from the shallow subsurface remains to be biogenic and naturally occurring. The CPT, the advantage we have with the CPT is that you can really discern that gas zone, because once you go into it, you know, as you're pushing the probe down, you have a constant increase in pressure, because as you go deeper, the hydrostatic pressure, the weight of the water above that tip on that tool, increases with depth. And when you go into a gas zone that's free of water, it'll flatline. So you go from an increase to a flat line, and then you go back to an increase. And it's that interval in between that enables us to put a number on the wall and say, I've got 3 feet of gas here, or I've got 5 feet of gas here. Now, I don't want to throw stones at anybody, but I think part of the reason that the gas quantity may have been overstated in this area around Sportsman's Landing is because we did depend highly on the MIHPT. So it doesn't benefit us to get information that's not factual or actionable. You don't necessarily want to use a tool that's going to lead you to believe that you've got a much bigger problem than you actually do. And I don't mean to sound flippant or, you know, that's just the scientific approach. And what we determined was that the CPT was the better way.
Yes, if I could explain it just a different way, Dennis, is that the CPT indicates gas that may be recoverable, whereas an MIHPT just indicates that gas may be there. And you don't know what kind of gas it is.
That's a good point. Remember what we said earlier on, I think it was Dr. Hartman on the BRC made this observation too, I think he said about a third of the gas that may have been released probably will never be produced because it'll become dissolved in the water. The MIHPT will pick that up, whereas the CPT won't because you're in water. So that was really the big advantage. I appreciate you bringing that up. I forgot all about that. But that's a good question. Nothing else from you, Bob?
I got one more.
Have y'all met, has everyone met BD?
Oh, BD. My dog.
That's his dog.
Bob's dog.
Bob's dog.
He brought him around, nearly stole him, took him back to Texas with him. That's a good dog.
The worst,
What's that?
Never met Bella.
No, he bring him.
I'll bring our dogs next time.
Oh,
I got 4, is that okay?
And
We'll
you've
just
got
bring it to
cats,
the next meeting.
right? You've got cats.
One cat, just one. Just
Well,
one,
Just one. You got some that you're taking care of?
just a few.
Okay. I don't have much else to report. I'll be happy to take any questions, whatever you got. Looking at you, Nate, because I know you got one.
Yeah, got one. ORW 38. Can you tell me, does the pressure well still have pressure on it?
Not to my knowledge.
Does ORW 38 have pressure on it?
Well, didn't you put it there because, is there another well there that has pressure?
VC2.
Yeah, BC2 did.
So what's the pressure on it?
VC2 is 0. The tubing pressure of 0, and I think the casing pressure was 5 or 6.
Okay, so is that before you started or is that after?
Well, it was after we performed the test on ORW 38, but we don't think there was a direct correlation between the depressurization of VC2 and the operation of the pump in ORW 38. We had a small leak on one of the quick fittings on VC2, and we just think that's how we lost the pressure on VC2.
All right, so what was the pressure on VC2 before you started?
Don't remember exactly. I believe it was 45 or 46 in that area.
47. So have you fixed your leak on VC2 and so have you got any pressure since?
It is not pressured back. We fixed the leak over the weekend. It was Thursday or Friday, and we've done pressure test on it, and we did soap and water for a bubble test on it. There's no leak.
So how do you go from 47 on pressure wise and you didn't get any gas out of 38, but you lost pressure in VC2?
We just had a very small reservoir of gas trapped in VC2.
Yeah, pressure doesn't indicate volume.
And so, so what you're saying is it's just one of those fluke things of nature.
No, there's an engineering basis here. What the point that Charlie just made needs to be repeated. You can have a container the size of a thimble that's full of compressed gas that shows on a gauge 2,000 psi. You can also have the Superdome in New Orleans filled up with gas and a gauge on it that's pressured up to 2,000 psi.
Not that
The
simple.
thimble, well, not that simple, but the thimble is released in an instant. The larger volume takes a heck of a lot more time. But you can't necessarily correlate volume with pressure. What we think happened was, and it was purely coincidental, because all of the scientists, all the guys working for us, said there's no way you could have pulled enough water out of 38, given the fact that we only dropped the head 20 to impact VC2. The more likely scenario was that surface leak that was discovered during the test and repaired about a day later. And what we concluded from that is the pressure that was on VC2 had to be a very small volume of gas, which is a good thing. The fact that it hasn't pressured up again is a good thing.
How did you, what's your results on your survey as far as the subsidence at 38?
Flat. Everything's flat. You haven't seen any subsidence from the dewatering.
When can we get the information from that the testing and the survey results?
Absolutely. Everything we do is recorded, and everything that's recorded is available.
What about the survey that was done as far as elevation for the community? I know that I saw Finstermaker out weeks ago.
Yeah. All of that is public as well.
The Finstermacher data was sent to DNR back in January.
Yeah. I'll say this again. Everything we do is recorded. And once it's recorded, it's public information. There's nothing out here that we haven't reported or disclosed and there's nothing that's been disclosed that you can't access.
Nick, it's been, my experience, and I don't mean that Don's standing behind you, I don't mean to badmouth your agency, but there's a heck of a lot of stuff on the DNR website, but it's not necessarily easy to find. And so what I would suggest, you may want to ask the other guy standing behind you with the net, with the tie there, Pat. He should be able to help you find it.
All right. Thank you.
Are there any others? All right, we're gaining on it, folks. I know it's been a